Hey, where should I go? Good evening. Woo. Good evening. Welcome to the Shoals Marine Laboratory's weekly science seminar. I am Mike Sigler, a scientist in residence, along with Rebecca Atkins at the Shoals Marine Laboratory. Thank you for joining us tonight for this evening's seminar, our 12th Rock Talk of the 2026 season. The Shoals Marine Lab is the oldest and largest marine lab in the country, focused on undergraduate training, both in coursework and in research. The lab is operated jointly by the University of New Hampshire and Cornell University. Our seminars are affectionately referred to as Rock Talks, in part because back in the early days of the lab, before we had formal classrooms and labs, faculty and guest lectures and seminars often were given literally on the rocks near the intertidal. We've migrated indoors now, but these weekly seminars provide a wonderful opportunity for our island community to come together and learn about, still laughing a little bit, about new and emerging research topics related to marine science. In addition to our guests joining us remotely tonight, we are joined in the Commons by students in marine environmental science, introduction to the biology of sharks, skates, and rays, and introduction to scientific illustration. In addition, we are joined by our research interns in the Shoals Undergraduate Research Group, affectionately known as We are excited to have everyone both in person and online joining us tonight for this seminar. The format for tonight's seminar is a 45-minute talk, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A. For our friends online, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will read your online questions out loud to the entire audience. For those of you in the Commons, we will pass around a mic for questions from you on island so that everyone can hear. Tonight's speaker is Dr. Mike Coogan. Mike is a marine scientist and research professor at the University of New Hampshire, whose work focuses on developing community-based aquaculture that supports fishing communities, strengthens working waterfronts, and promotes healthy marine ecosystems. His research spans multi-trophic aquaculture, offshore scallop farming, habitat restoration, environmental monitoring, and innovative approaches to sustainable seafood production. Through partnerships with fishermen, coastal communities, industry, and regulators, he works to advance practical, science-based solutions that benefit both people and the ocean. Mike earned his PhD in aquaculture at Auburn University. Whether he's conducting research, diving, fishing, surfing, or sailing, you can usually find Mike on the water. This evening, Mike will present Keeping Coastal Communities Alive, from Fisheries to Aquaculture in New Hampshire. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Mike Coogan.
Good. Okay, what? Can you guys hear me all right? Is my mic on? We're good. Okay. Hello, everyone. How are we doing today? Before I start, I just want to give a massive shout out to the people in the kitchen right now. Can we give them like a huge round of applause because they're unbelievable? Hey guys, we love you. Okay. They never disappoint. Okay. And before we start again, we will start eventually, but I want to ask you all one question. A show of hands. Who has eaten seafood this week? Okay. It's like quarter a year or something like that. And who of you know where your seafood came from when it was pulled out of the ocean, and who might have produced it, fished it, or farmed it, or anything else like that? Almost no one, right? And that's kind of what we see a lot of the time. And that's something that I'm trying to work on. A lot of my research sort of focuses on that. I think we should really get connected to where our food comes from, seafood and otherwise. I spend most of my life on the ocean, but same thing from where you get any of your food. And so we're going to be talking a lot about where our food comes from and sort of this region in general and the amazing ecosystem and culture and community that we have here in New Hampshire. And so just a little overview of the presentation. We're going to break it down into a couple different chapters, starting all the way back 12,000 years ago. So buckle up to about the 1620s before Europeans showed up, because obviously there were people here on the Isle of Shoals and in New England for a very, very long time, for tens of thousands of years. Moving on to the 1620s to the mid 1800s, moving on past that towards the Industrial Revolution, industrial fishing, towards the present, the era of adaptation, as I'm calling it, and then talking about the future. And sort of after all that, we'll get to some of my research, but I really think it's important to know sort of where we came from and where we're standing today. And so without further ado, I'm going to be talking a bit about the working waterfront today. We're going to be covering a lot, but what the working waterfront is, if you haven't heard that term before, it's exactly what it sounds like. But when most people think of the working waterfront, they think of fishermen and captains, and that's about it. But it's so much more than that. It's the entire community that revolves around the ocean and the coasts. And so this isn't just fishermen. Of course, they're super important, but the processors, fishermen usually don't, like we just spoke about. Most of us probably didn't buy our seafood from that fisherman or fisherwoman. So we need processors, we need distributors, we need boat builders and mechanics, fuel docks. Ice is so important. What happens if you don't have ice on your fish? After a couple of hours, you're not going to be wanting to eat that seafood after a little while, right? And then, of course, restaurants and tourism. And that's so important and such a huge aspect of this area of this ecosystem. Let me get one more hands. Raise your hand if you are from New England. Okay, cool. Raise your hand if you're from the coast. All right, cool. A lot of coastal folk. And then you get something called the multiplier effect. So for every dollar that actually reaches the docks from, say, fish or seaweed or something else like that, it gets compounded through the economy, through all these other players. And for every dollar, it equates to about $1.50 or $2.50 going into the economy. So it stimulates this whole area. And just before we even dive more into the seafood, it's important to know where we are right now. You guys have been here for a little while. You're getting familiar with the Isle of Shoals. We're in an incredible area. New Hampshire has a tiny, tiny coastline. It's only about 18 miles, but it's so diverse. Who's from New Hampshire? Did I ask that? Yeah, let's do that one more time. Yeah, New Hampshire's amazing. We got mountains 2 hours from here. We've got estuaries. We've got ocean. We've got islands, obviously. And it has basically produced this incredible ecosystem, particularly the marine ecosystem. So you've got the Labrador Current bringing cold, nutrient-rich water down from Canada. You've got the Gulf Stream that sort of juts off past Cape Cod. And so we get a lot of interesting ecology here. You've got all of the different 7 rivers running in that feed Great Bay that eventually come out into the Piscataqua River, where Portsmouth is situated there. And then you have deep water, you have shallow water, you have marshland, you've got oyster reefs, mussel reefs. We've got an incredible ecosystem here. And even more so on Isle of Shoals. This sort of encompasses it all. So the Isles of Shoals are an amazing place, as you all know. Just being here. Has this been an incredible, how long have you all been here? 2 days, 9 weeks, all sorts. Has it been awesome? It's a pretty incredible place, right? It's like, I mean, it feels like summer camp here, but you feel very far away from the ocean. And this place has been so important for peoples for thousands and thousands of years. The natural history is amazing. The ecology is amazing. Indigenous communities have been coming out here for many, many thousands of years. And the first Europeans first showed up in the 1600s. But it was settled and used seasonally for many, many years before that. So let's start 12,000 years ago or so. Like I said, there were people coming here typically during the summer. They would come out in these dugout canoes and paddle over here. And it was all really sustenance fishing. There wasn't necessarily like a market economy. They weren't exporting anything anywhere else. They were trying to feed their families, their communities, their tribes, etc. Right. And so people have been coming to the seacoast, not necessarily Isle of Shoals, for over 10,000 years. And we have had abundant marine resources for that entire time, right? So when you think of this area, a lot of people think of cod. The shoals were named after the bountiful cod that we used to have here that were bigger than me, 200 pounds, 6 foot plus, just enormous cod. And they used to say there were so many you could walk across the water on the cod. We obviously have lobster, that's a huge thing here, but herring, sturgeon, eels. There used to be Atlantic salmon in all of our rivers here, waterfowl, shellfish, eels, and loads of whales. Have any of you seen whales over the last time that you've been here? Yeah, or any time in your life? I mean, amazing, right? So this was this incredible area that fed people for many thousands of years, and they struck a balance. So moving on, Europeans first showed up here and really started settling here in the 1620s or so. And Portsmouth, for all the reasons that I mentioned, became an area that they wanted to settle because of the bountiful marine resources. You have the river right there, so you can go up into the land a lot more easily, transport goods all throughout the area. And it became a thriving port for a long time, hence the name Portsmouth. So fishing really was sort of centered around fishing because we had these really abundant resources, and it was really centered around cod. If any of you guys are interested in an amazing book, that book Cod by Mark Kurlansky is one of the coolest just natural history and just books in general that I've ever read. It talks about how sort of the world as we know it has been based upon cod. The Europeans that first came here, they think we're following cod, the Vikings, and following them all across the Atlantic. And it's played a huge economic and cultural and social role throughout the world. And so all of this sailing, though, when the Europeans first showed up and they were building Portsmouth and the surrounding communities, it was all done on these large sailing vessels like you see here. All right. But we had international trade. Cod was the main export. They would salt it because this was long before refrigeration or ice making. So they would salt the cod to preserve it, send it over to Europe, send it throughout the Caribbean for some bad reasons. It was also food that they used for the Atlantic slave trade, but it was this massive export part from the area. And so yeah, Portsmouth grew and grew and grew. It became this hub for fishing, for shipbuilding, for trade, for naval activity. Became a fairly big whaling area as well. Not as big as on the Cape and some of the other areas in New England, but there was a fair bit of whaling here as well. And then the Industrial Revolution happened and industrial fishing happened. And this is when things really changed. And so the first thing that came was the steam engine as well as diesel engines. And so no longer were these boats powered by sail. And if you're, do we have any fishers here? Fishermen, fisherwomen? You ever tried to fish off of a sailboat or drag? It's a whole lot harder. It's nice to have an engine behind you. So you can go out a lot further. You have a lot more control. We also started developing ice production during that time, mid 1800s to the mid 1900s. So that allowed people to build larger ships, go further offshore, tens to hundreds of miles offshore, fish for weeks at a time. And they were able to use these otter trawls, which are just massive nets that they tow behind these vessels. And they take up, a huge chunk of the water column. And they also came up with sonar during that point. And sonar is really important for fishermen today because they can, if you look down at the ocean, you don't know what's beneath it. Typically, fishers would look out, they'd look for birds, they'd look for signs that, Mother Nature is giving them. And now for the first time, they could actually see what was going on beneath the surface. And so they could target these massive schools of fish. And so what ended up happening is fishing got super productive, but it also destroyed a lot of stocks. People used to think about the ocean as this never-ending resources that you could, exploit forever, and the fish would never run out. And we found out, unfortunately, that wasn't the case because we kept fishing at this industrial scale. What it also did, there used to be these small boats, and it would be family-operated boats, and you would go, sustenance fish or catch a small catch throughout the day. They were these day boats. You'd bring it home. You might export it, process it, sell it. But for the first time with these larger boats, this isn't something that the average person living in Portsmouth could afford. So what happened is wealthy people or more ambitious people, they would get a big bank loan or use their own funded money and buy massive vessels. Other captains that were, third, fourth, fifth generation fishermen now had to work for this other corporation. And so it really consolidated fishing from being sort of community based to being kind of a monopoly. And so a lot of people came on hardships. What also happened, I don't know if have you guys heard of sort of the collapse of the cod fishery before? A lot of you? Yeah, it's sort of the most common story, but it's that top figure there. I'm not going to show you too many figures here, but you can see from the 1850s all the way through the 1950s, for 100 years, there was this steady increase of landings, which is when they catch cod. And we're talking about hundreds of thousands of tons. And all of a sudden, you see this boom of industry, sonar, all of that. And then in the 1960s, 1970s, it spikes up and ended up collapsing the fishery. We thought that we could continue fishing it forever, and that turned out not to be the case. And so look at after that in the 2000s, it's nearly zero. And to this day, the commercial codfish industry doesn't really exist. People typically try and avoid cod, at least the commercial people. Recreational people can catch one cod, whereas used to be able to catch hundreds of tons. So that's a sad story. We're gonna move past that. But during this time, people also created regulations because they realized that this was becoming a problem. And so there are happy stories as well. That's a figure on the bottom is for striped bass. And they were almost wiped out, the commercial fishery, in the 1950s, 1960s, all the way to the 1980s. And they realized that this was an issue. They enforced regulation and policy, and the striped bass have bounced back, and they're doing pretty well these days. So fisheries management really started during this period. And if you look at just this classic Maine lobster boat over 100 years from 1860s to 1960s, you can see why all of this happened, right? Technology can be great, but with great power comes great responsibility, as a wise man once said. All right, and now we're here today. So the 2000s to today, we've learned a lot during this time, and fishing has totally changed. We now have aquaculture. I'll talk about that a little bit. And people have become environmental stewards. So we have habitat restoration and a lot more community engagement. And so, but we also have a lot more problems than we were dealing with before. We're dealing with a changing ocean. We've got climate change. We've got a shifting species as the Gulf of Maine is warming faster than almost anywhere else in the world. And because of that, a lot of these species that have relied on these cold water currents, high nutrient area, they're shifting either to deeper, colder water or further north. And that's obviously challenging for people that want to live here. We also have ocean acidification, more extreme weather events, loads of invasive species coming through, and ecosystem change. At the same time, the fishermen are facing a lot of problems as well. The regulations don't always work for them, and sometimes it can be very challenging to them, especially these smaller fishing boats. Fuel, if anyone drives a car here, fuel is outrageous right now. Same thing with bait costs, and it's a huge burden to a lot of fishermen. That's putting a lot of people out of business. Waterfront access is an issue as well. Who's going to end up getting oceanfront property? The fourth generation fisherman who's been, paying his bills the entire time and not necessarily scraping by, but he's not a millionaire or like some hedge fund person from New York that comes in and buys a mansion, and so a lot of these people are being pushed out. But there's a lot of positives as well. A lot of people that work on the ocean are learning how to diversify the way that they make a living. So ecotourism is totally growing. Aquaculture, we'll talk about in a bit. And then there's a lot of collaboration between science. And there's a lot more environmental stewardship. So scientists and fishermen and community members have never had a tighter connection than they had before. If you look back 50, 100 years or so, the scientists were sort of working in a vacuum in these ivory towers, and they never really spoke to fishermen. Fishermen have so much knowledge that scientists don't know. The scientists, they go out for 10 days or so a year, 20 days, maybe a month or so a year. If they're really spending a lot of time on the field, the fishermen are there every single day. Fishermen also often did not collect data. They didn't write these lessons down. And, they would pass them on for generations to people they knew, to their communities. And as we see this shrinking fleet, a lot of that amazing information and wisdom that's been sort of compounded over many, many years is lost. So this collaboration is super important to maintaining not only their livelihoods, but the ecosystems that they rely on. So I'm not going to go over these challenges too much. We just were talking about that. A lot of challenges we're dealing with right now. So let's go to the future. Let's go to the happy stuff. And so there is incredible research and collaboration and work being done on the ocean right now on this working waterfront. We've got, of course, sustainable seafood, which includes aquaculture, responsible capture fisheries. There's a lot of restoration happening as well. Tons of marine science technology. I mean, all of these things. Clean energy is huge, offshore wind, and tourism is getting big, and conservation is becoming more and more important, as is coastal resilience. Houses are being built totally different. Infrastructure is being built totally different. I'm sure as you walk around on this island, you see, everything has been built for a purpose here because we have a changing world and we're trying to be more sustainable. So, yeah, let's keep moving on here. I want to talk a bit about aquaculture. Who here has heard the word aquaculture before? Yeah, yeah. Do you feel like you have and you could be honest, do you feel like you have a positive perception on aquaculture in general? Raise your hand. Raise your hand if you have a negative perception on aquaculture. All right. Okay, that's good. That makes me happy. All right. It's been an uphill battle for a while. My aquaculture journey started in grad school. I was doing coral research for a while, which I didn't really think about as aquaculture before. But I used to see these guys coming in with like boots every day, covered in fish guts, and turned everybody else off. But I was like, I want to get in that. I want to be covered in fish guts, smell like fish, and actually have my hands dirty, playing with animals every day. And I saw aquaculture as a way to combat overfishing and a lot of the issues that I'd been reading about and didn't feel like I could make a big difference for. But put most simply, aquaculture is just the farming of aquatic organisms. Now that includes freshwater, saltwater, and brackish water, which is a mix. And it's not anything new. It's sort of a hot word these days, but it's been happening for many, many thousands of years. 6,000 BC in Australia. In China, they've been doing it since about 2000 BC. So people have been raising aquatic organisms for a long time. Now, these can be, a lot of people think of fish when they think of aquaculture, but aquaculture is any organism. So it can be, shellfish, oysters, and also scallops. It can be algae, kelp, anything that you grow in the water, right? It's the fastest growing food production sector in the world by quite a large margin, supports millions of jobs worldwide. And the reason why I really got into it is because I was reading a lot of basically what I was just talking about a minute ago. I was reading a lot about the collapse of the wild fisheries and seeing how a lot of the regulation took quite a long time to work and sometimes didn't work. And I felt like there was this disconnect. And for me, this was very simple. If you take less fish out of the ocean and you can produce them in a different way, then those fish that are remaining in the ocean can repopulate and grow, right? So that was the general idea. But there are, of course, issues with it as well. It can cause water pollution, habitat destruction, and disease outbreaks, among other things. So we have to do it responsibly. Does anyone have an idea of what the most produced aquaculture species in the world is? Rice? It is grown in water. Actually, I never thought about that. I mean, that's not what I was going to say. You're definitely right. All right. Besides rice, though, that's smart. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's a good guess. Yeah. Shrimp. Okay. Cod. Okay. Oysters. We got a lot of really good guesses. And to be honest, it kind of depends how you view it. And I was wrong about all of this. It's probably rice if you count that as aquaculture. But by volume, it's seaweeds. All right. And it's mostly coming out of China and Asia, a lot in Korea as well. But certainly not by value. But there is loads and loads produced, hundreds of millions of tons produced in China. Japanese kelp is huge. Kelp farming is big here as well. If we're talking specifically about animals, you said shrimp. That's exactly right. Shrimp is the number one, followed very closely by carps, which are mostly grown in Asia as well. If we're talking the most grown fish, it's carps. Salmon and shrimp sort of, teeter-totter back and forth between having the most value. But there's loads of different species. Hundreds of species are grown throughout the world. In the US in particular, what do we think it is? Most grown species. Besides rice. Actually, I don't know if rice would be it on this. What was that? Catfish. Exactly. Catfish. Which is crazy. Who's eating catfish? Yeah, you like it? It's pretty good. I never touched a catfish until I started my PhD in Alabama, and then I had it every day for years. It's pretty good. Yeah. The South and sort of the Midwest, because they like warmer water, and so they grow them in these ponds. And there are many, many acres, a lot of these ponds. And it's just a more simple version of farming. Some of them have like aeration, but mostly it's literally just a stagnant pond. And they are delicious fish. I have a question for you. Is this aquaculture? You can say yes or no. Yes. All right. Pretty clear, right? That's a cobia farm in Panama. That is also aquaculture, same farm. Is this aquaculture? Yeah, okay. Those are scallops grown in Japan. Is this aquaculture? Well, probably, but from our simple aquaculture is the farming of aquatic organisms. You don't always have to breed some of them to farm it, right? You can purchase them and grow them out. So what do we think? Is this aquaculture? Yeah, it's an organism grown in water, right? Is this aquaculture? This is what a catfish farm looks like. All right. This was the farm I managed for many years down in Alabama. Is this aquaculture? Yeah, we could know what that is. It's kelp. Yeah, seaweed. Is this aquaculture? That's an oyster farm. Is this aquaculture? Yeah, Nemo, right? Clownfish. Ornamental aquaculture is totally aquaculture. And this is one of, I think, the most sustainable types of aquaculture because typically they would go in and dynamite fish reefs and totally destroy reefs or add cyanide and kill reefs to try and get these valuable reef fish out of there. And now a lot of these species, this is kind of one of the more common saltwater ones, but a lot of them are aquaculture right now. No one's pulling clownfish out of the ocean. Is this aquaculture? This is coral. Yeah, this is coral restoration project. You say some yes, some no. I mean, it depends what you decide aquaculture is, right? But they're growing an organism in the ocean, in water, and it is an animal. Now, is this aquaculture? Ooh, yeah, this would anger some fishermen. I don't know. It's up to us to decide what aquaculture is, right? There's not really a right or wrong answer. But if anyone's ever gone lobster fishing before, kind of seems like aquaculture to me. You're feeding them, you're kind of ranching them. A lot of the ones that you catch, you or somebody else has fed before. It's sort of just like a massive communal ranch in an area, but they wouldn't call it aquaculture. So let's jump into New Hampshire in particular. So I think we touched on this before, but aquaculture in New Hampshire is 100% dominated. I mean, not 100%, but for emphasis, I mean, it's dominated by oysters. All right. And almost all of them are grown in Little Bay, which is that number 2, that small section of Great Bay, as well as Hampton Seabrook Estuary, which is a little further south than here. But almost all of them are in Little Bay. Last I checked, we've got about 12 farms there. So it's not a massive industry, but again, we've got a small little coastline, 18 miles. And oysters are an amazing, who likes oysters? All right, they're amazing. Yeah, delicious. They're also ecologically super beneficial. An adult oyster can filter 50 gallons of water a day, filter feeding, so they're cleaning that water all the time. So a lot of projects are using them for bioremediation to clean watersheds. And they're quite valuable, $3.7 million in ecosystem services. Whereas the total value, if you include eating them and tourism and restaurants and all of that, is $4.7 million a year. But there is more than oysters in New Hampshire. Something that I'm working quite a bit on is something called, we call it the Aqua Fort. You may have seen it. Did they come by the Aqua Fort on their way up? Yeah. Okay. So as you were leaving the Piscataqua, the river coming out of here, leaving the harbor, it would have been on your right, and you'll notice it when you go back in. But it was a small, black structure. You might not have even noticed it, but if you did see it, that's where I spend a lot of my time. And there, we do something called integrated multi-trophic aquaculture, which is a mouthful. But what it really just means is growing things from different trophic levels. So, for example, steelhead trout is fed fish. That's one trophic level. Blue mussels, we also grow with them. They're an extractive species. If you think about a food web, they're in different areas of the food web or the food chain. And sugar kelp is the other one. And so the principle behind this, a lot of people have been growing for quite a while. They're certainly more valuable than mussels and sugar kelp, at least per volume. But one thing about fish is they release nutrients into the environment, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but too much of a nutrient can cause eutrophication. It can create dead zones where you have these massive phytoplankton blooms. The phytoplankton consume a lot of oxygen. A lot of them end up dying, and you create dead zones where the whole bottom habitat is not really conducive to life. It can kill a lot of things. And that's something that happened during a lot of the early days of sort of industrial aquaculture. So what we're trying to do here is we grow these trout, which are a fed species. We feed them every day, or about 6 days a week. And they poop, pee, and release ammonia through their gills. Most of it can get absorbed by microbes in the water column. But the blue mussels and the sugar kelp, the blue mussels, similar to oysters, are filter feed for those nutrients. And the sugar kelp, being a plant, sucks up a lot of nutrients as well. So the idea is that it's a net neutral sort of balance. And so you have more of an ecosystem approach. But not only that, the season for harvesting these steelhead trout is the summer. The season for harvesting the blue mussels is typically fall and spring. And the season for harvesting sugar kelp is typically early spring. So if you're somebody that's farming these, it sort of diversifies your income. We're also doing a lot of sea scallop work, and I'll touch on that in a little bit. And then one other one that, you don't hear too much about is there is a lot of recreational trout stocking in rivers and ponds that people can fish for. And that certainly is a type of aquaculture. So I'm going to talk a bit about my research now, starting off with, well, we've got these 4 different sites. So we're out there, number 3, Isle of Shoals. We actually have a little kelp farm, like right out there where it's just 400 feet long. We're growing sugar kelp out there. And we also have another sugar kelp farm near number 1 right by Newcastle. And it's amazing how different the 2 of them grow because the conditions are totally different. We also have that IMTA system, the Aquaport, which I'll talk about in a minute. That's just off of Newcastle that you may or may not have seen. But when you're coming back in, take a look. It'll be on your left as you're coming into the river on the way back. And you'll see, maybe I'll be out there. But you'll certainly see someone there. We've got at the Seacoast Science Center, which is, just on the shore right there. It's a little aquarium. We've got a demonstration site where we're growing all sorts of different species, urchins, oysters, and all sorts of things there. And then where I do a lot of my work is number 4, which is our offshore site. And it's a permitted site. It's 130 acres and it's, pretty offshore. It's fully exposed. We're in between 90 and 150 feet of water. And that's where I do all of my scallop aquaculture research. So I touched on this a bit, but we've got this integrated multi-trophic aquaculture. That's a steelhead trout. It's the same species as a rainbow trout, but for whatever reason, it's the only one of these salmonids, which are trout and salmon, where they change the name when it goes from freshwater to saltwater. I don't know why they decided to do that. Some of them don't make it out to the ocean, but a lot of them do. But yeah, that's a steelhead trout. They're beautiful. They go through this incredible process, physiological process. To go from freshwater to saltwater is very, very challenging for a lot of fish to do, and most can't do it. We grow them in tandem with the blue mussels, which is, right over there, as well as sugar kelp. We also can grow lumpfish in there, which are those adorable ones just to the right of that fella Eric. And they're cleaner fish. They can eat the parasites that may or may not be growing on the steelhead trout. But we're also permitted to grow other types of seaweeds, such as dulse, which is a red algae, nori, which is another red algae, and sea lettuce, which is a green algae. And we can grow scallops and urchins there as well. And a bit about where these come from. It's sort of interesting. They're not actually native to this area, which is a little bit certainly an issue, but they've been stocked out in rivers here for well over 100 years. But they originate in the Pacific Northwest. We get them as eggs, and they're shipped down to Sumner Brook Fish Farm, which is a little hatchery about 2 hours north of here. And they grow them out for about a year until they're about this big, 300 grams or so. We purchase them. We move them offshore. This is all freshwater here. Nice cold river water. And then I'll catch you in a second. And then we move them directly into saltwater. We feed them a diet that has excess salts and allows their body to go through this physiological process to deal with salt water. We don't have to acclimate them. We don't have to do anything. We can dump them right in there, and pretty much all of them survive that. Do you have a question? Yeah, that's huge. That's a really good question. So they have been introduced here for quite a while. What we do a few things to avoid that. The first thing is they're all female, and so they can't breed if they were to escape. And then my team, I'm a biologist, but half my team are engineers. And so the system that we design is very, very much overbuilt. But one question we get all the time are the seals try and get it because it's basically a buffet, and we've got loads of seals here. And we haven't had that problem yet, but other farms certainly have further north in Maine. We have not had that problem, and I don't anticipate that we will have that problem, but it comes down to both being good biologists and good engineers to make sure that can't happen. But there are steelhead trout in this area in general. And I have mixed feelings about growing a non-native species in the area. It's considered, they consider it, an established species here, but I think that's a little crazy. I'd rather be doing certain other species, but this species in particular happens to be a really, really good aquaculture candidate. They grow really fast. They've got good market value. They're absolutely delicious. And you can grow them to the size in about a season. And they have been introduced here for quite a while. So here's hopefully this video plays, but this is a little video about our site. And there's our cute little farm right there. And you're way out in the distance. So this is the UNH Pier. And we work very closely with fishermen, and we have for about 20 years now. The idea being that, this is something that they could do sort of in unison with their everyday fishing. But if there was a cooperative where a few of them wanted to work this farm together, they could bring an alternative means of income. And this is us actually stocking them, these nets with trout. So you might see some trout pop out there in a second. With those exactics, those big blue coolers basically were brought down on trucks from Ossipee, New Hampshire. They haven't ever seen salt water in their life, and they're being dumped down right into there. And so we've been working with this fisherman, Lord Byrne, for about 10 years right now. And he's been amazing and a big proponent of aquaculture, which is cool to see for fishermen. But yeah, we live in a beautiful place, and they're a pretty amazing species. So these fish we stock out. We've tested growing them out in the summer, and we've tested growing them out or stocking them out in the winter. And we found they do a lot better when you stock them out in the fall and they have that early stage in the winter. They really like cold water that has a lot of oxygen. And so it's a lot less stressful. Even though they're able to make that change from freshwater to saltwater, you want to make it as, little stress as possible. And so, yeah, we stocked them out in October, about 300 grams. And I'll show you what they look like after a little while. So that's an aerial view. And we tried stocking them out at different sizes to see what was both biologically and economically made the most sense. Now, these aren't big systems. It's a 20-foot by 20-foot pen, and each one of these bays, and it's about 15 foot deep. So it's not a huge volume, and we make sure that our densities stay well below, any animal welfare thresholds or anything like that. If you try and push fish or any farm animals too hard, you can come up with a lot of issues. So we don't want to do that. It's stressful for them, and a stressed fish is not what you want. So yeah, these were stocked. We tried stocking them at 300 grams and at 150 grams. And I'm not going to have too many graphs, but I will give you a couple quick ones. So first in the red is when they were hatchery size, about 300 grams. We sampled them a few times. Then we moved them right around the beginning of November, where it turns blue. And you can see immediately they start growing quite a bit faster. Winter, because they're cold-blooded, they grow a lot slower than they would in warmer water. Their metabolism is directly related to the temperature of their surroundings. So if it's 15 degrees Celsius outside, their body is 15 degrees Celsius. If it's 10, their body is 10. And they'll grow about twice as fast for every 10 degrees Celsius. Now, this little figure on the right, you'll notice that the scale on the x-axis is a little bit different. So it goes by every 2 months or so, every 1 to 2 months on that left one. And now it's going about every week or 10 days. And you can see, the slope goes a lot more vertical. And so they're growing quite a bit faster. So we stocked them out in, that year was around around 8.2, and we stocked them out at 300 grams. And by literally 1 year later, they were 2,661 grams. They basically 10x in size. And most of that happened in just a few months between, those summer months, between May and July, August. Do you have a question? This is specifically fish, and it's average individual fish weight. And so that's that black line that you see here is the average weight. If you look on that red line above that, that's the largest one we pulled in. And so the largest one we ended up getting was 4,700 grams, which graphs are great, but nothing like a picture. We stocked them out. They barely fit in your hand. And about 9 months later, this one was 10.4 pounds. We had some 15-pound plus this year as well. So it's a great fish for that reason, and it's delicious. I actually brought some smoked trout if anyone wants it later. I've got a bunch of packets for you if you guys like to eat it. But of course, we're scientists. We're not just farmers. And so we want to know, environmental impact is really important and performance is really important. So we do quite a bit to try and make sure that we're not having a negative impact on the environment, starting with instrumentation. So we've got instruments that are measuring everything from, dissolved oxygen, pH, salinity, temperature, turbidity, to dissolved organic matter and chlorophyll A, because that's so important for the ecosystem. We measure the nutrients coming out of it. We take water samples to look at environmental DNA so we can actually see and quantify what species of fish and invertebrates and other types of life are happening around our system. And we've actually seen over time that the biodiversity around our fish pens increases pretty dramatically all throughout the year as we're growing them. So we certainly don't seem to be having a net negative impact on the environment. If anything, you could say, I'm not going to say that it's a positive impact, but as far as biodiversity, it seems to be. And that's probably because not only the nutrients and a lot of things accumulated around there, but fish love structure. And if you provide them a structure, they like to hang out around there. Let's move on to scallops. This is sort of my baby. This is where I dedicate a lot of my time and energy. And there's not a lot of people growing scallops. And they're an amazing species to farm. So this is specifically the Atlantic sea scallops. Real quick, raise a hand. Who likes to eat scallops? Whose favorite seafood is scallops? A few people. I mean, it's good. They're really good. They're really expensive. They're going from like 40 to 50 bucks a pound right now. So they're very valuable, obviously. They grow very quick. There is clearly an established market in the area, and there are established culture methods, mostly developed in Japan. And so that's everything you want for an aquaculture organism right there. An extra bonus is that you don't have to feed them. That's a huge one. In fact, they're filter feeders, so they're cleaning the water around them. Now, one thing about the United States scallop industry is we don't have a farm aquaculture industry here. Very, very, very small one, but it makes up less than 1% of what's produced domestically. Meanwhile, all of the scallops that we eat, about half of them come from imports from abroad. And if you go to any of those countries where they're coming from, mostly Japan, China, Korea, a lot of it is happening in Southeast Asia. They've really pioneered a lot of this. It's the opposite. They are farming 99% of them and wild harvesting less than 1%. So we happen to have the largest, by far, scallop fishery in the world. And it has remained fairly healthy over time, but it's very, very boom and bust. There are species that we call very fecund. They release loads and loads of sperm and eggs into the water column. So if you have a good year, you've got a lot of scallops coming in a few years. If you have a bad year and you overharvest, that can totally deplete the stock, and that's happened several times throughout the decades. And so it seems like a great thing to do here. We have a tiny industry, and this is something that we are really excited about. There's also some issues, you know. The way that they grow them, these here are called, I have a bunch of props out there. I'll show you in a minute. But the way that they grow them in Japan is these things called lantern nets. It's a type of suspended gear. There's a big headline split between buoys that's about 10 feet or so below the water column. And they hang all of these lantern nets. Each one of those little chambers will have a dozen or so scallops in there. And it's a pretty good way to grow them. It needs a lot of labor. There's a lot of maintenance. You have to clean them really often. You have to take them out, make sure that there aren't any predators or anything like that. The other thing that we have to worry about here that they don't really have to worry about nearly as much in some of these other countries where they're growing them is entanglement risk of protected species, and in particular, the North Atlantic right whale. I don't know if you guys have heard of any issues with the North Atlantic right whale, but they're critically endangered. There's about 400 left. And one of the main reasons causes of mortality is entanglement, specifically in these vertical lines. So we don't want a lot of suspended gear. And so we're looking at a different way to grow them. Do scallops typically hang out in the middle of the water column? Do you guys know that? No, where do they hang out? Yeah, they're benthic. They hang out in the bottom. And so we figured, why not listen to the organisms and grow them where they want to grow? And so we started growing them on bottom gear. And one thing we noticed that was great about that is that there was almost no biofouling. If you get them to 100 feet or below, biofouling, by the way, is sort of what it sounds like. It's just organisms that grow on top of something else. If you ever look at like the buoys and stuff that are floating about and moored, you'll see that they're covered in barnacles and mussels and kelp and things like that. And all of these things can interrupt the way that an aquaculture organism grows. And so we don't want that. We want it to be nice and clean. If you keep things at the surface, they get totally fouled up, especially in the summer when everything's trying to live and grow and all of that. If you get them to deep, deep, dark waters, pretty much below where the light penetrates, then you get none of that. And so the labor costs go way down. And we also are thinking about, as I've mentioned a few times, this sort of shrinking vessel fleet. We're trying to think about the fishermen who have been facing a lot of challenges for a lot of the years. And so we are trying to develop gear that works with them, not against them. So this is where we grow our site. It's a 130-acre site, about 2.7 miles offshore. It's about that way. And it is anywhere from about 90 to 150, 160 feet deep. So we have this project where we are basically trying to develop an industry for Atlantic sea scallops in the area. So we're trying to answer all of the questions that you need to develop an industry, both the biological, the economic, and the community-based questions. Starting off with the biology, what density do you want to grow them at? If you stock them too dense, what happens is they have very sharp shells and they'll start ripping each other apart, not on purpose, but if you have any wave action, it ends up killing them. They also don't grow nearly as fast, even if that does happen. But if you grow them with too low density, then it's just not profitable. And so we're trying to find that balance. Trying to figure out what the best location is, the best depth, the best gear types. It doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense, right? So we're doing a techno-economic analysis. We're also trying to figure out what causes, tasty scallops versus not so tasty. If anything affects their texture, if you have something that doesn't taste good or doesn't taste as good as the wild scallop, nobody's going to want to eat it. We also are very fortunate. Oh, you guys are legends. Thank you. Okay, we got some gear. So we're also trying to figure out what the best way to catch, to collect them is, because we don't have hatcheries really in the United States. And in a lot of other countries, they don't either. And so fortunately, I mentioned they were very, very fecund. They released hundreds of millions of sperm and egg into the water column. Most of those float out into the abyss and are never seen again. They die, they get caught in mud or whatever. So what we do is we catch them, the wild ones, while they're still in the larval stage. And we're trying to figure out the best way to do that, where to do that, where in the water column to do that, when to do that. We're trying to answer a lot of questions here. We're also trying to make sure that there's no diseases, which that fancy one, scallop apicomplexing complex, is a disease that the wild fishery deals with a lot. You don't want disease in aquaculture or in wild fisheries, right? And then lastly is actually trying to turn this into an industry. And that takes a lot of buy-in from the community. So let's talk about spat collection. Spat. The spat is just a baby shellfish. Baby oysters are called spat. Baby mussels are called spat. It's when they settle, and baby scallops are called spat. And so the way that we collect them is we time them. They like to spawn in the summer, and they like to settle in the early fall, late August, early September, sometimes late September. They have a very short window. And what you do, if you set out an anchor, a vertical line. I talked about problems with vertical lines, so we have to come up with good ways to deal with that, such as breakaway links and making sure that we're not in any, critical right whale habitats. But a vertical line going to a buoy, and all along that vertical line, you've got these here. These are just mesh bags. There's nothing fancy about them, and they're filled with this material inside that's just plastic. And it creates a big bag. It's got a lot of substrate, a lot of surface area for them to attach to. That's what they want. They're floating around in the water column, waiting to land on something hard, because if they land on mud, they suffocate and die. So they find this nice solid bag. They love it. It's a new home. They can pass through this fine mesh, settle on the material inside, and then once they start growing on there, they're too big to fall out of it. And so you can pull one of these up in the spring, following spring, and there you can find thousands and thousands of baby scallops, and it's awesome. And you can see some of that profits right there. So we'll set out hundreds and hundreds of these bags sometimes. And what we do is we grow them out on bottom gear. Again, we don't want to have an entanglement risk. This right here is a lantern net. And this is the way that they grow them in a lot of the world. It was invented in Japan, and it's a pretty good process, but very labor intensive. You can see it's got stuff growing on it. This was after we cleaned it. A lot of things will grow on them because they're only 10 or so feet in the water column. And so does this look like anything to any of you guys? Lobster pot, right? Exactly. We call this a scallop pot. And so we're working with this company that thought about this idea pretty much the same time as us, which is awesome. And it's the same size, same weight as a lobster trap. And we set trawls of them exactly how you would set a lobster trawl. And so fishermen that might be having a hard time, maybe market price is way down, maybe the catch isn't so good, they can set up a bunch of these, and during these tough times they can dive into their trawl and pull out 100 scallops out of this. And so you set these bags of different sizes, and you can set trawls of 2, 5, 10, 20, whatever you want, just like you'd set a lobster trawl. And what you'll notice here is there's no vertical lines there. So we're using all ropeless mechanisms to make sure that we don't are an entanglement risk to North Atlantic right class. You've never seen a scallop before. They're not just juicy meatballs. That's what they actually. They're beautiful and they swim. So I'm gonna kind of zip through that, but the whole goal of this is to basically develop an industry, create areas where fishermen can develop an alternative income and reduce pressure on the wild scallop fisheries. Now, I'm also working on another project that's a scallop stock enhancement project. I mentioned that they go through these boom and bust years. So if we want to stabilize that, there's things we can do to restock the wild fishery. And so this is a project we just got funded for that I haven't actually started, but I'll tell you a bit about it. And the goal is to evaluate scallop stock enhancement in northern New England. And we're focusing in New Hampshire, Maine, and Massachusetts. And it involves spat collection, nursery grow out, predator experiments, because if you throw a bunch of baby scallops out there and they all get eaten, you just wasted a lot of time and money. And then the actual reseeding process. And it starts with spat collection. That's mostly being done in Maine, a little bit here as well. But we've partnered with this amazing scientist here who has these transects all throughout the coast of Maine and captures millions and millions of spat every year. And has been very gracious to partner with us. And so we'll be getting loads and loads of spat because if we want to make a difference, we need to release potentially millions of spat. But again, we don't want to kill them. So we got to grow them out to a certain size. If you released a bunch of those babies out there, probably a lot of them would get eaten. Everything likes to eat scallops. And so we are growing them out a year first to get them to about 2 inches or so. They're a lot less vulnerable to predators at that point and to environmental changes. So we're growing them out at that site around here in New Hampshire, that 130-acre site, as well as by the Aquaculture. We've also partnered with 2 farms in Maine that are going to help us grow them. And we're growing them both in suspended gear and this bottom gear because we want to see if that makes a difference with not only how fast they grow, but also how vulnerable they are to predation. And I'll talk about that a little bit. And then we're messing around with different densities as well. So the predation is my biggest concern with this. You can waste a lot of time, a lot of money if you dump them out there and just feed the world. You know, you don't want to do that. They've got a lot of predators. Primarily, we've got Jonan rock crabs, lobster, Asteria sea stars, and a couple of different types of you've got the channeled whelk, and you've also got the moon snails, different types of gastropods. And so we're going to be doing some tank-based predator experiments in sort of 2 phases. The first phase is just seeing my theory, and something that they found in other research is that if you grow the shellfish in aquaculture versus the wild, they have a lot thinner shells and they might be more vulnerable to predators. So we want to see, is that due to them not being exposed to the predators, or is it due to something else? And a lot of people are in oysters and in mussels, they have found that exposure to these predators through chemical signals thickens up their shells. So we're going to do the same thing by exposing them to predators in cages so that the predators can't eat them, but they're still getting those sort of chemical cues. And so the scallops will spend 6 months in a tank with rock crabs, with another tank with lobsters, another tank with sea stars, another tank with channeled whelk. And we'll look at their growth over time and we'll see their shell thickness and strength as well. And then beyond that, we need to find out at what stage are they no longer very vulnerable to predators. And so this is when we're going to actually expose them to the predators. And the predators can eat them if they want. And so we will try various size classes from, pinky nail size all the way to about 2 inches and see, you don't want to release them at 2 inches because you've invested so much money. You don't want to release them when they're too small because they'll die. So we have to sort of find like that magical balance there. And then the last part of this experiment is actually releasing them. And the way that we're able to see if these are our scallops, in fact, is we can stain them with this dye called calcium, which fluoresces when you shine the right wavelength on it. And so it's non-toxic, so it's not going to mess anything up. But if we go over this with the right type of fluorescent light and strobe, we can pick it up and we can say, oh, that's a scallop that we actually released versus a scallop that was naturally there. And so we're going to release them out into a bunch of different sites, 2 sites in Maine, 2 sites in New Hampshire, and 1 site off of Cape Cod. And we're going to watch them over an hour, 2 hours a day, over a week, and see, is this a buffet or are they actually surviving? And we're going to sample them over time. We're going to do different types of survey techniques to see, how they do, how they perform, how they survive, and what the predator situation is. And that's pretty much all I got. I just wanted to Really quickly, just touch on some of the other amazing research that's being done at University of New Hampshire. If any of you do live here and you want to get involved, there are some incredible scientists here, and I'm barely scratching the surface, but there are people focusing on so many of our problems, from ocean acidification to lobster research, all sorts of acoustics, and fish tracking, habitat monitoring, oceanography, lots of stuff. And I also wanted to say, I wasn't sure how many people actually live here. There's many ways to get involved with marine science and conservation. And here are some of the amazing organizations that are doing great work in New Hampshire. And even if you don't work for them, buy local seafood. That's helping. Lastly, I'll say we started a podcast. Check it out. Pretty good, I think. And I'll take some questions. Woo!
Thanks so much, Mike. If you're online, you can put questions into the Q&A box, and we'll do that. In the room, if you have a question, I will bring the microphone to you.
Okay, hi, big fish fan. That was awesome. So, in your years in working in aquaculture, how often have you ran into parasitic problems in your farms?
Once this year, fortunately. I have not encountered any parasites before. This year, for the first time, we did things a little differently. And normally we harvest everything by around September. So we grow them out for about a year, harvest them, we let the farm fallow for a year, or sorry, for 1 month, and then we stock them out a month later. Last year, we were a bit too ambitious because the previous year we had such a good market. Everything was working perfectly. So we grew a lot more trout, and the market turned out to not be that good that year. So we ended up keeping these fish that were already reproductively mature, these females with big developed ovaries, which is very costly for them, over winter. It was a super cold winter last year, and they were super stressed. For the first time, we found gill flukes in them, which typically don't cause mortality, but they certainly don't look nice. You have to pick through every single one of them. And we did find some mortality this year as well, probably due, like the salmon, trout, most finfish aquaculture industries, you always try and harvest before reproductive maturity, because not only is it stressful for them after, but they've invested so much energy, not into muscle growth, but into reproductive growth. It's not something that you want. Most people don't eat eggs. And caviar they do, sturgeon, but typically not. But yeah, unfortunately this year we did have some issues, but that's the only time I ever had in over a decade. Hey,
Aaron?
you know, you do things to deal with that, to avoid parasites as well. Like good aquaculture management typically avoids most problems. But yeah, Aaron?
Howdy, big
Hi.
shellfish fan here.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I have a comment and a question. The first is that my entire project this summer has been putting predator cues through containers into mussel containers. And I didn't want to do shell thickness because that means I'd have to kill them. But it's definitely something that I've seen in research and stuff. But if you want any tips or tricks, or if you have any tips or tricks, and we want to exchange information on why it's so frustrating to do that experiment, let's talk. Second of
Awesome. There's my email, by the way, everybody. And I think that takes you to the Center for Sustainable Seafood Systems, which is where a lot of my research comes. So feel free to look at that. And I think my podcast is there. But yeah, let's totally talk.
I will. The second, I've noticed like a lot of zoos lately have mixed like species that will never ever interact in the wild because they like it's kind of beneficial to have that like weird random partner there. Do we see that in aquaculture where you said like this might be not like a native species in a certain place, but do they ever put species together that would never mix otherwise?
Do they ever do that? I'm sure. I mean, they certainly culture species that are non-native in certain areas. I don't really like that. I don't really approve of that typically. One advantage of, having species that's not native there, like we see this with invasive species a lot, is there's often not predators. And so like for a bivalve or something, or these scallops, if we introduce them to an area where there weren't natural predators, that might be a great spot for them. But then you have a lot of unintended consequences as well. So I don't think, not that I know of. Yeah.
Hello, thank you so much. I'm a big fan of sea urchins.
Cool.
So I was wondering because you said that you grow sea urchins, is there a market at all for selling them for food or other purposes? And do they like contribute, I don't know, cleaning to your aquaculture, like taking away algae?
That's an awesome question. And yes, and yes. Uh, there certainly is a market. It's not a typical American market. It's usually an Asian market, and they're very, very valuable. It's called uni in Japanese, and it's delicious. If you've ever never had it's the roe, and it's golden and wonderful, and pretty expensive. So there certainly is a market for it. Yes. Cool. It's amazing. I love it. And you do have to like fatten them up. So your second question is for biofouling purposes, and helping clean things. And yeah, that's something we're looking into. And one of our collaborators on the scallop project grows all of the scallops with sea urchins because they help clean his cages, and that's super advantageous. It's a lot cheaper than hiring somebody on, and then you can sell them at the end of the day. We are messing around with that a little bit. We don't find a ton of biofouling once we get them really deep. That hasn't really been a problem, but we certainly are interested in the market for sea urchins and just eating them. Yeah.
I'm curious. So I've heard a bit about using environmental RNA to monitor aquaculture populations. I'm curious if you're familiar on that. What species you think it could be applicable to, and then what bottleneck you think might exist in terms of like applying that at scale?
Environmental RNA versus DNA.
Yes.
I'm not so familiar with that. I would think it would degrade very, very quickly in UV. Does anyone know much about that? That can answer that better than I can?
Grad school. Sorry.
Yeah.
I saw a grad school opening. I can't remember if it's UNH or somewhere else in the New England area, but I think it's mostly for closed loop systems. So probably a little bit different than
Gotcha. Yeah.
open water.
That would make more sense. Yeah, I think RNA would degrade super quick in sunlight. So that might be problematic. DNA already degrades sort of quickly as well. But I could see there's a lot of applications for RNA, but I'm not super familiar with that. I'll take a look for sure.
Do you know what like the policy looks like for aquaculture? Because like obviously there are like regulations, but like do you think it's like very caught up or like very widespread across countries? Or do you have any fears that it might catch up and disturb your already like operations?
That there'll be stricter regulations.
Yes.
There's very strict regulations already. We have some of the more strict regulations in the world. In other countries, it's a lot easier to get farms. In the US, it's almost impossible to get farms in federal waters, which is anything beyond 3 nautical miles from the coast. Shoals, because it's an island, is still technically in state waters. But every state has its own regulations, and there are different permitting agencies that are involved with like what type of gear you put out and what species you're growing and all of that jazz. So like, for example, we're in Maine right now, so we can do something called a limited purpose aquaculture license, which is super easy to get. I can get in about 6 months, and you can grow most anything besides fish. And so that site that we have here was really easy to get. We couldn't get that same site in New Hampshire. So, and every state varies a little bit. But do I worry that regulation is going to get stricter? Yes and no. I think we're in a good time right now. The current administration is actually, as much as they're not in favor of a lot of research, Trump likes aquaculture. Probably because there's a $20 billion seafood trade deficit. We import about 80% of our seafood, and he sees the numbers. And so, I mean, from my research, that's been pretty helpful because there is money right now for aquaculture, whereas there's not loads of money elsewhere. But a lot can change in, between administrations, and a lot can change between states and all of that. But permitting is one of the biggest challenges for aquaculture expansion in the US. A lot of people go to other countries because it's a lot easier to get a farm off the ground there than it is here. It's really hard to get farms in the water. We don't have any farms in federal waters in the entire country, at least finfish farms. And many have been proposed and have been sort of stalled for a decade plus.
Especially in your steelhead and other fish farms, do you have any issues with birds taking your fish and like messing up with your data? And what do you do to prevent that?
We have a bird net on top. And yes, if we didn't have that, they'd be gone for sure. We do have issues with birds for mussels. Eider ducks love to eat mussels, and we put a mesh around them. Nets. Nets is the solution. You have to exclude them. There's all sorts of technology to exclude birds. It's less of an impact issue for us, but oyster farms, especially floating ones, birds like to sit on them and they poop a lot, and that can cause a lot of issues because they're pooping all over your oysters. And in like our catfish ponds, we would get herons that would eat our fish sometimes. So there's all sorts of things. People would come around, like it's the South, so people shoot shotguns and stuff to scare them off. But we would have like loud booms. You would have these sound machines that made a high frequency noise that apparently disrupted their chatter. And if they can't talk to each other, then they don't want to hang out with each other, apparently. And it seemed to work pretty well. Yeah, but birds are certainly a problem.
Is there or should there be a future in only aquaculture and no fishing?
You're asking my opinion? Yeah. No. No, I think they need to go hand in hand. And I think the lines should really be blurred between that's sort of why I was asking that. Is this aquaculture? Is this aquaculture? Because a lot of the time the lines are blurred. Like what I'm doing with the scallops right now, especially the stock enhancement. Like I want to support the fisheries as much as possible. I want people to be able to fish. I love to fish, and I think people should be able to fish forever. I think that some fishing practices are terrible, to be honest, and I think things are getting better. But I'd love a world where we have very, very healthy fisheries. But keep fishing.
I think that's all we have time for questions. Mike will be at the front if you want to ask him more. Next week, we'll welcome Greenland's own Jim Coyer, who represent salmon farming and ranching in the North Atlantic. Oh, a discussion. You can, the talks are recorded and posted to the Shoals live stream page on our website, shoalsgreenland.org. And for those of you on island right now, when you leave, you can join us online also. And I think Jim's is the last one of the season. So please join me again in thanking Mike for such a great.
Thank you. Thank you. And I will be around if you want to.